My name is Victoria Whitman. I'm 58 years old. I've spent most of my life being the reliable one, the woman who shows up early, stays late, and never makes a scene. I believed family meant loyalty, respect, and a place at the table. That belief shattered the night they seated me in the back like I didn't matter. I arrived at my nephew's wedding reception with my hands shaking slightly as I pulled into the parking lot. The venue was stunning. A restored mansion with ivy climbing the brick walls and white lights strung between ancient oak trees. I'd spent 3 months helping coordinate this event, calling vendors when my sister Brenda was too busy, confirming details, even paying for the photographer when the budget fell short. I smoothed down my navy dress and walked through the carved wooden doors, expecting to find my name card near the family tables. Instead, an usher barely looked at me before pointing toward the back corner. "You're at table 19, he said flatly. Table 19. I walked past the head table where Brenda sat laughing with her husband. Past tables 2 through 10 where cousins and aunts gathered. I kept walking until I reached the very back, near the kitchen doors, where the clatter of dishes echoed and the air smelled like dishwater. My name card sat alone on a table with strangers, people I'd never met. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to sit down and arrange my face into something that looked calm. I sat there watching waiters rush past with trays balanced on their shoulders. The woman next to me introduced herself as someone's coworker from another state. She didn't know anyone either. I smiled and nodded, but inside, my mind was spinning. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately placed me here, away from everyone who mattered. I could see Brenda from where I sat, her head thrown back in laughter, surrounded by family. Our brother Kenneth sat beside her, raising his glass in a toast. Not once did anyone glance toward the back to see if I was okay. The music started, and couples filled the dance floor. I watched from my corner, invisible. My chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone there. I'd been erased from the family picture without a word. The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Deep down, I'd felt this coming for years. I just never wanted to believe my own family would make it this obvious. I thought back to every family gathering for the past 20 years. I was always the one who arrived first to set up chairs. The one who stayed late to clean. The one who remembered everyone's birthdays and showed up with thoughtful gifts. When Dad got sick, I was the one who took time off work to drive him to appointments while Brenda claimed she was too busy with her career. When Kenneth needed money to start his business, I loaned him $15,000 without asking for a contract. He never paid me back, but I never mentioned it. I thought being dependable meant being valued. I thought putting others first would earn me respect. But sitting in that back corner, I finally saw the truth. They didn't respect me. They used me. I was the reliable one because I never demanded better. I was the afterthought because I never made myself a priority. My silence had taught them I didn't matter. And they learned that lesson well. During dinner, I caught my cousin Natalie's eye across the room. She looked at me for just a second, then quickly turned away, her face flushing pink. That look told me everything. She knew. They all knew. This seating arrangement wasn't some random mistake by a confused coordinator. It was intentional. Discussed. Agreed upon. Natalie's guilty expression confirmed it. Someone had decided I belonged in the back, and nobody had spoken up to defend me. Not one person had said, "Wait, that's Victoria. She's family. She belongs with us." The realization hit me like cold water. I wasn't sitting in the back because of an error. I was sitting in the back because that's where they believed I belonged. Out of sight. Out of mind. Convenient when needed, invisible when not. I took a sip of water, my hands steady even though my heart was racing. Something shifted inside me in that moment. I decided my silence would no longer protect them from the truth. After the meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I walked past the family tables, I heard Brenda's voice carrying over the music. "Well, we had to put her somewhere," she said, laughing. "She never complains anyway." Her friends laughed along with her. My feet stopped moving for just a second, but I didn't turn around. I kept walking, my face neutral, my breathing controlled. She hadn't whispered it. She'd said it loud enough for others to hear, like my dignity was just another joke to share over champagne. That comment crystallized everything. This wasn't about seating arrangements. This was about how little they valued me. How small they'd decided I was. But here's what Brenda didn't know. I wasn't weak. I was careful. I wasn't defeated. I was thinking. And I just stopped reacting emotionally. From that moment on, every move I made would be strategic. They wanted quiet Victoria. They'd get her. But silence doesn't mean surrender. I returned to my table and sat down without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. I observed. I watched Kenneth dominate conversations, talking about his successful construction company, the one I'd helped fund. I watched Brenda hold court like a queen, basking in the attention, the same woman who'd asked me to cover her mortgage payment 3 years ago when she was between opportunities. I listened to toasts praising their generosity, their leadership, their importance. Nobody mentioned me, and I let them talk. I let them believe they'd successfully push me aside. Let them think I'd accepted my place in the shadows. But while they celebrated, I was adding up numbers in my head, calculating contributions, remembering loans, noting every time I'd been the safety net they took for granted. They'd underestimated me my entire life. They were about to learn that was a mistake. The next morning, I sat in my small apartment with a cup of coffee and began making a list. Everything I'd given over the years. Every favor. Every loan. Every time I'd bailed someone out of trouble. Kenneth's business loan, $15,000 unpaid. Brenda's mortgage payments, $11,000 total, never mentioned again. Dad's medical bills that I covered when everyone else claimed poverty, $22,000. The list grew longer. I didn't do this out of bitterness. I did it because I needed to see the truth in black and white. For decades, I'd been the family's safety net. The reliable one who fixed problems and asked for nothing in return. They'd mistaken my generosity for weakness. My kindness for stupidity. But I'd been keeping records. Not intentionally at first, just out of habit. Bank statements, emails, text messages, all of it documented and saved. I realized then exactly where my power still lay. Over the next week, I started connecting dots I'd ignored for years. Brenda had been orchestrating my diminishment for a long time. It started small, forgetting to include me in group chats, scheduling family dinners without telling me, speaking over me during conversations. Then it escalated. At Dad's funeral 3 years ago, she'd seated herself in the front pew and relegated me to the second row, even though I'd been Dad's primary caregiver. At last year's Thanksgiving, she'd created a seating chart that placed me at the kids' table while she sat with the adults. I'd brushed it off as organizational oversight. Now I saw it clearly. Brenda had spent years training the family to see me as less important. And it worked because I never pushed back. I never made a scene. I'd been so afraid of seeming difficult that I'd let her erase me. But the wedding seating wasn't just cruelty. It was a power play. And I finally understood why. I stopped returning their calls immediately. When Brenda texted asking me to help organize Kenneth's birthday party, I didn't respond right away. I waited 3 days, then replied with a simple, "I'm busy." No explanation. No apology. Just unavailability. When Kenneth called asking for advice on a business deal, I let it go to voicemail. I called back 2 weeks later and kept the conversation brief. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I didn't send a dramatic message. I just quietly stepped back from being their go-to person. At first, they didn't notice. They were too used to my availability to register my absence. But after a few weeks, the cracks started showing. Brenda called, irritated. "Where have you been? I needed you to pick up the decorations." Her tone wasn't concerned. It was annoyed. Like I'd failed to perform my assigned duties. I told her I had other commitments. Her silence on the other end told me everything. She hadn't expected resistance. I started hearing through other family members that Brenda was telling people I was going through something. That I was overreacting to the wedding seating. That I needed to get over it and move on. She was rewriting the narrative, painting me as emotional and difficult. I didn't correct her. Let her think I was just being sensitive. Let them all believe I'd eventually fall back in line. Because while they were dismissing me, I was meeting with a lawyer. Not to sue anyone. Just to understand my options. to review documents I'd signed years ago and make sure everything was in order. I discovered something interesting during that appointment. Dad's will had left his house to all three of us equally. But Brenda had been living there rent-free for 5 years, claiming she was taking care of it. Kenneth had supported that arrangement, both of them benefiting while I paid my own rent across town. My lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're entitled to rental income or buyout," she said. I smiled. They'd assumed I'd never check. I started documenting everything with new clarity. Every text message where they asked for favors. Every financial transaction. Every time I'd been excluded or dismissed. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. One afternoon, I sat down with a financial advisor and showed him my records. He looked at me with something like respect. "You've been funding your family for years," he said quietly. "Do they know how much you've contributed?" I shook my head. They never asked. He helped me create a clear financial boundary plan. No more loans. No more emergency bailouts. No more covering expenses that weren't mine. I felt lighter after that meeting, like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was mine to put down. The truth was finally on my side. And I had the documentation to prove it. When the time came to speak, I wouldn't need to shout. The facts would speak for themselves. 3 months after the wedding, Brenda called me in a panic. Her voice was tight with stress. "Victoria, I need help. The property tax on Dad's house is due, and I'm short by $4,000. Can you cover it?" In the past, I would have said yes immediately. Would have transferred the money before even hanging up. This time I paused. "Brenda, you've been living there for 5 years. Have you been paying rent to the estate?" Silence. Then defensiveness. "Rent. It's the family house. We're family. Then we should all benefit equally," I said calmly. "I'll need to see the financial records for the property. And we should discuss either selling it or formalizing a rental agreement." She sputtered. "Are you serious right now?" "I need help and you're being difficult." "I'm being fair," I corrected. "I'll send you my lawyer's contact information. She can help us sort this out properly." I hung up before she could argue. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From relief. I'd just set my first real boundary. And their reaction confirmed everything I'd suspected. I was never respected. I was only useful. The family group chat exploded after that call. Brenda posted a long message about how I was tearing the family apart over money and being cruel during a difficult time. Kenneth chimed in, saying I was out of line and needed to remember what family means. I read every message without responding. I let them vent, let them paint me as the villain. Because something interesting was happening. A few family members started asking questions. My cousin Natalie privately messaged me. "What's really going on?" My Aunt Francine called. "I heard there's an issue with the house. Your father's house." The cracks were spreading. Other people were starting to realize the story Brenda told didn't quite add up. Why would Victoria suddenly become difficult after decades of being helpful? What had really happened? I stayed quiet and factual. When people asked, I simply said, "I'm making sure everything with Dad's estate is handled fairly for all of us. No drama. No accusations. Just facts." And that made me seem reasonable while Brenda's increasingly frantic messages made her seem desperate. 2 weeks later, Kenneth called. His voice had none of its usual swagger. "Victoria, we need to talk about this house situation. Can we meet?" I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. When I arrived, both Kenneth and Brenda were there, sitting in a back booth. Their faces were tense. I sat down calmly, ordered tea, and waited. Brenda started first. "You're being unreasonable. Dad would have wanted us to work together." I sipped my tea. "I agree. Which is why I'm asking that we follow the terms of his will properly. He left the house to all three of us equally. That means equal benefit or equal loss." Kenneth jumped in. "You never cared about this before." "You're right," I said quietly. "I never advocated for myself before. I'm correcting that now." The silence that followed was thick. They'd expected me to back down, to apologize, to return to my old role. Instead, I pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of bank statements, loan records, and a letter from my lawyer outlining my legal rights regarding the property. I slid it across the table. "This is what fair looks like," I said. Their faces went pale as they flipped through the pages. Brenda tried a different approach. We're family, Victoria. This isn't about legal documents. I looked at her directly. When you seated me in the back at the wedding, was that about family? Her face flushed red. Kenneth looked away. That was just seating arrangements, Brenda mumbled. No, I said firmly. That was a message. A message that I don't matter. That my contributions don't count. That I can be dismissed without consequence. I stood up. I got the message. Now you're getting mine. I matter. My contributions count. And I will no longer be dismissed. I left them sitting there stunned. For the first time in my life, I'd spoken my truth without softening it, without making it easier for them to swallow. I drove home with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. I'd finally said what needed to be said, and the weight I'd been carrying for 58 years began to lift. They could no longer rewrite history or pretend the past didn't happen. The truth was finally out in the open. Over the next month, I let them sit with that truth. I didn't reach out. I didn't smooth things over. I let the silence do its work. During that time, other family members started reaching out to me. People I hadn't heard from in years. They'd heard versions of the story from Brenda and Kenneth, but something wasn't sitting right with them. Aunt Francine invited me to lunch. Tell me what really happened, she said gently. I told her everything. Not with anger, but with facts. The years of financial support. The wedding seating. The house situation. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I had no idea, she whispered. None of us did. That's because I never said anything, I replied. I thought being quiet made me strong. It just made me invisible. Other conversations followed. Each time, I stayed calm and factual. No exaggeration. No drama. Just the simple truth. And slowly, the family began to divide. Not into sides exactly, but into those who wanted to understand and those who wanted to maintain the comfortable lie they'd been living. Brenda sensed she was losing control of the narrative. She called an emergency family meeting at her house, the house that legally belonged to all of us. I almost didn't go, but my lawyer advised me to attend. Hear what they have to say, she said. But remember, you're not required to agree to anything. I walked into that meeting with my folder of documents and a recording device in my pocket. Legal in our state for protection of my own interests. Brenda sat at the head of the table, Dad's old spot. Kenneth was beside her. Several other family members filled the other chairs. Brenda started by saying this meeting was about healing the family and moving past misunderstandings. But within 5 minutes, she was pressuring me to stop being difficult about the house. We can't afford to buy you out right now, Kenneth said. So you're just going to have to wait. I placed my folder on the table. Actually, no. I don't have to wait. According to the will and the law, I can force a sale of the property. I've been patient for 5 years. That ends now. The room went completely silent. Brenda's face turned red. You wouldn't do that. That's Dad's house. That's our house, I corrected. And I've subsidized your lifestyle long enough. I opened the folder and began listing everything. The $15,000 to Kenneth. The $11,000 to Brenda. The medical bills. The forgotten loans. The years of unpaid rent. Each item documented with dates and amounts. Kenneth tried to interrupt. That was family helping family. Exactly, I said calmly. Family helping family should go both ways. But it's only gone one way for 20 years. I've helped you build businesses, keep homes, and survive crises. When I needed basic respect at a family wedding, you seated me in the back. My voice didn't rise. I didn't yell. But every word landed like a stone in still water. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm asking for fairness. Either buy out my share of the house at market value, or we sell it and split the proceeds. Those are your options. You have 60 days to decide. The shock rippled through the room. Aunt Francine nodded slowly, understanding finally clicking into place. My cousin Natalie looked at Brenda with new eyes. Even Kenneth seemed to deflate, his usual confidence gone. They'd believed I was powerless because I'd never used my power. They thought I was weak because I'd never fought back. But I wasn't powerless. I was patient. And patience had allowed me to build an unshakable case. Brenda tried to recover. This is ridiculous. You're destroying the family over money. No, I said quietly. You destroyed something more important when you decided I didn't matter. I'm just cleaning up the mess. I stood to leave. Kenneth grabbed my arm. Wait. Just wait. Let's talk about this. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then met his eyes. You have 60 days. After that, my lawyer files the paperwork. I walked out of that house where I'd been erased from the narrative, and I didn't look back. The apologies started 2 weeks later. First, Kenneth called, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Victoria, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you'd done for us. Can we talk? Then Brenda sent a long text message. Paragraphs about stress and misunderstandings and how she never meant to hurt me. How family was important and we needed to work this out. But something had shifted in me. I read their apologies and felt nothing but sadness. Not because they were apologizing, but because their apologies were motivated by fear, not genuine remorse. They weren't sorry for treating me badly. They were sorry I'd finally called them on it. They weren't sorry I'd been hurt. They were sorry they might lose money. Real apologies come with changed behavior. These apologies came with demands that I drop my legal action and let things go back to normal. But I was done with that version of normal. The version where I sacrificed and they benefited. Where I was useful but not valued. That normal was over. I met with them one final time. Not at the house, but in my lawyer's office. Neutral ground. Professional setting. Clear boundaries. They sat across the conference table looking uncomfortable. My lawyer laid out the terms clearly. Either they could buy out my third of the house within 60 days at the appraised market value, or the property would be sold. Additionally, I was no longer available for loans, financial support, or emergency bailouts. I would attend family functions I chose to attend, but my presence was no longer automatic. Brenda's eyes filled with tears. You're really doing this? Yes, I said calmly. I'm choosing myself. Something I should have done years ago. What about family? Kenneth asked. I looked at both of them. Family should lift each other up. Family means respect. You taught me that the back of the room is where I belong. I'm teaching you that I belong wherever I decide to be. And I've decided I no longer belong in spaces where I'm not valued. I stood up. You have my terms. The choice is yours. Then I walked out, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wait for permission to leave. I didn't check if they were okay with my decision. I simply chose myself. Publicly. Finally. And it felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, Kenneth's business hit a major snag. A contractor backed out of a big project, leaving him scrambling. He called me at 9 in the evening, his voice desperate. Victoria, I need help. I'm about to lose this contract, and I need someone who understands accounting to review these documents by tomorrow morning. Please. In the old days, I would have stayed up all night helping him. Would have dropped everything to save him from his crisis. This time I said calmly, I'm not available for that kind of help anymore, Kenneth. You'll need to hire a professional. The silence on the other end was heavy. Are you serious? This is important. So was basic respect, I replied. I gave you decades of my time and expertise for free. That arrangement is over. I could hear the shift in his breathing, the realization hitting him. He'd taken me for granted so long that my unavailability seemed impossible. His reputation took a hit when that contract fell through. People in the family whispered about it. And several people looked at me differently, realizing I'd been his safety net for years. Without me, the cracks in his success started showing. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of his choices. 2 months after the lawyer meeting, Brenda came to my apartment alone. No Kenneth. No lawyer. Just her, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She stood at my door with red eyes. Can we talk? Just us. I let her in, made tea, and waited. She sat on my couch, twisting her hands together. I was wrong, she finally said. About the wedding. About the house. About everything. I sipped my tea and stayed quiet. I think I was jealous, she continued, her voice cracking. You were always the one Dad praised. The responsible one. The smart one. I got attention by being loud, but you got respect by being steady, and I resented it. She looked up at me, tears streaming. I tried to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I let her words sit in the air for a long moment. This was different from the rushed apologies before. This felt real. But real doesn't mean everything is fixed. I appreciate that, I said quietly. But Brenda, apologies don't erase years of hurt. They're just the first step. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What can I do? Buy out my share of the house, I said. Honor the boundary I've set. And prove through your actions, not just words, that you see me differently now. Brenda and Kenneth pooled their resources and bought out my third of the house. It took them 3 months to gather the money, and they had to take out a loan. But they did it. The check arrived certified in the mail. My lawyer verified everything, and I deposited it without ceremony. That money represented more than a financial transaction. It represented my freedom from a system that had kept me small. I used part of it to travel, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I could afford after supporting everyone else. I went to places I'd only seen in magazines. And for the first time in decades, I didn't check my phone anxiously waiting for the next crisis I'd need to fix. I also started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping women who'd lost themselves in service to others. I understood their stories because I'd lived one. When Brenda called asking for help with something small, I evaluated it honestly. If I had time and energy, I helped. But within clear boundaries and without sacrificing myself. And if I didn't have capacity, I said no. Without guilt. Without apology. Just honest boundaries. I sit now in my own space, a woman who finally learned that quiet doesn't mean powerless and that patience isn't the same as passivity. My relationship with Brenda and Kenneth isn't what it was, but it's becoming something more honest. Something built on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. At last month's family dinner, I arrived to find my name card at the main table. Not hidden in the back. Not shuffled to the side. Right there with everyone else. Brenda had placed it there herself. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. When Kenneth asked my opinion on a business decision, he actually listened to my response instead of talking over me. These small changes don't erase the past, but they signal something shifting. I learned that being seated in the back wasn't about my worth. It was about their fear of my power. So they tried to make me small. But you can't diminish someone who finally understands her value. I'm 58 years old. For most of my life, I believed staying quiet meant being strong. Now I know that speaking up, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself is the real strength. They seated me in the back because they thought I didn't matter. I stayed quiet long enough to prove them wrong.